And let's talk about Devonta Smith, because you've got stake in him. I like him. He's going right now as 33rd overall in drafts, and A.J. Brown is going 13th overall in drafts. And I bring this one up because that is a pretty big discrepancy. I mean, 20 picks difference. You're talking about a little under 2 rounds difference between the two. It's almost like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. The only difference being you shift it down 2nd to 4th round there.
Yeah. I kind of pulled this strategy last year when I got Devonta Smith. I wanted A.J. Brown, and I was at the tail end of the 2nd round, and it was A.J. Brown or Travis Kelce, and I took Travis Kelce. But I wanted a piece of this offense, and I think the ADP was a little bit more split last year on him because A.J. Brown came into this offense. They thought, all right, A.J. Brown's going to take all the targets. Devonta Smith is going to disappear.
Correct.
And which is crazy because Devonta Smith is actually a number 1 receiver.
Yep.
And they brought in another number 1 there. The stat splits are pretty interesting. I did the video on him today. Devonta had more receptions, but was outshined in terms of yardage and touchdowns by A.J. Brown. But what was interesting is a lot of those splits were in like the first half of the season. If you look at the last 9 games, including the playoffs, only 2 of those games did he have sub 10-point performances, including a couple 20-point performances in there. Yeah. And one of those games that he had sub 10 points was against San Francisco when they literally beat the quarterbacks to death to where Christian McCaffrey was having to play quarterback.
Yeah.
And so they had like a 2-3 score lead, and they were just like, here Boston Scott run the football for the rest of the game because we're not going to injure anyone for the Super Bowl.
But I do agree with you on that stat line. He was fantastic definitely at the end of the season, but they're 2 different receivers, and I want to make that very important because A.J. Brown's a beast. He's 6'1", 225. I mean, he's a house and the biggest difference being
you want to see what kind of receiver A.J. Brown is. Watch the Pittsburgh Steelers game.
Yeah, but like here at the end of the day, you look at the stat line for A.J. Brown. He had over 10 yards per target versus Devonta Smith was a little over 8. So 2-yard difference is pretty significant over the course of a full season. And he had literally a 17 yards per reception for A.J. Brown last year. His yards after the catch for A.J. Brown are definitely where he makes his money and where he gets in the end zone versus Devonta Smith is a great pass catcher, and he's a great route runner. He gets himself open, but after the catch is not where he shines. If he's catching in an open space and he's running, he's got the speed to break down the field for yardage, but he doesn't have that yards after the catch movement. And I think that's what separates the two. But again, I'm splitting hairs here. I want one of these guys on my team.
He had over 1,100 yards. He had close to 1,200 yards last year.
Yeah, exactly. He's finished at wide receiver 10 last year.
Was it?
I think he finished wide receiver 10 last year in standard scoring. Wide receiver 10 with just under 1,200 yards. He had 12.5 yards per reception and 7 touchdowns. I mean, yeah, A.J. Brown with 11 touchdowns helps you get to wide receiver 4, but still.
So this is another guy like Higgins. Like this is a great draft strategy for people that are listening. Is that you go and get 2 running backs in the 1st and 2nd round. You can go and get like T. Higgins and Devonta Smith in round 3 and 4.
And boom, you've got 1,000-yard multi-touchdown receivers that they literally play like wide receiver 1s, and you've got 2 studs in your first 2 picks.
Exactly. And so, or you go and get Kelce there, or you go get Mahomes there in the 2nd, and you can go and get these guys. There's always going to be, in the 3rd to 6th round, there's always going to be a plethora of receivers that are going to be productive. They're not going to be those top-end guys, but they're going to be guys that are going to be consistent and productive the entire season. And look, I got Devonta Smith last year in the 7th round, and he ended up being wide receiver 10.
Yeah.
So, like, this is a perfect example of, people like Allen Robinson were being drafted over him last year. and that's a mistake because
It was
he's
drafting a name.
offense.
That's what you're doing. You're drafting a name. And
Drafted the name.
you're just trying to what you're doing. What people do when they do that.
Do you want to know who drafted Allen Robinson last year?
No.
This guy.
Yeah. Well, I will say part of the reason why people end up doing that, and I've been guilty of it before, is because you look to try and get the wide receiver 1 on their team. But that wide receiver 1 on their team is not always going to be the best receiver on the board at the time. Like, you've got to be the guy in your league sifting through the crap and understand that, hey, these guys are names. These guys, yes, they're the number 1 on their team. And yes, they may be ranked higher, in ADP, but this guy here is going to outperform him because 1, he's on a better team, and 2, he's a better receiver. He just is not the number 1 guy there. And I mean, just look at Ridley and Julio Jones when they're together. They were insane. It happens across the board when you get 2 good guys on a team like that.
Well, Devonta Smith is another guy that I would take him, the number 2, over pretty much half the league's number 1.
Yeah. I mean, would you take him? Here's a great one. We just talked about this. Would you take him over DK Metcalf?
Yes.
Okay. Because he's 2 spots down. Would you take him over Keenan Allen? That's a tough one. Keenan, would you take him over Amari Cooper? That's a tough one. I wouldn't.
Probably not.
I wouldn't because I'm high on the Browns this year. But
yeah, I think Amari Cooper is gonna shine this year. So I would probably take Amari Cooper. That's close.
Would you take him over Terry McLaurin?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Calvin Ridley?
Without a doubt. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm with you on those ones too. It just it's funny how we worry about those big names there. Like, it would be tough for me to pass on Keenan Allen, but at the end of the day, is Keenan Allen going to go for 1,700 yards? Is Keenan Allen going to go for 10 touchdowns? Like, it would be tough to see that happen. So I know that there's going to be a pathway for Devonta Smith to get over 1,000 yards and over 6 touchdowns this season again.
Yeah. And last year there's been a bunch of stats floating around, so I'm cautioning people to disregard them. They're showing the splits on when Goddard was healthy between AJ Brown and Devonta Smith when Goddard's healthy versus when he's not. I would caution on that because I think that this offense is going to be a lot different than it was last year. Last year was heavily revolved around running the football because they got the lead early in games. This defense, it's still good, but I think last year's defense, especially in the secondary, was much, much, much better than it was this year. Mm-hmm. Now, they still have elite corners, but the safeties are not as elite as they were last year. They got better in the run game, but the back end of the safeties and the over-the-top coverage is not as good. So I think that the Eagles are going to get scored on more. They're going to have to shoot out a little bit more than they did last year, and that bodes well for the receivers. More so than you saw Miles Sanders have, 250 carries last year, had 1,200 yards rushing. They put a lot more on Jalen Hurts running the football, and I think that after him getting injured at the end of last season, they were like, well, we're not going to allow that to happen as much, where they're going to have him run a lot more of the RPOs. They're going to make him pass more. And I think that bodes well for Goddard. I think that bodes well for A.J. Brown and for Devonta Smith. So I think that all their numbers are going to increase, even if all of them are healthy. Yeah. And then, listen, if A.J. Brown or Goddard gets hurt, of course, Devonta Smith is going to feed.
Well, I just like Devonta Smith anyway because regardless of the Goddard noise, is when push comes to shove and you're in tight games, he's your best route runner on the team. He's going to find ways to get open, and Hurts is going to need to find an outlet to be open. So let's move on to our last one here.